Welcome back to 5 Minutes Splunk. Today's video is creating a Linux virtual machine. This is the third video in a series where we stand up a real lightweight VM for developing Splunk apps, playing around with Splunk architecture, things like that. So as always, we'll begin with some getting started links. We'll recap the past two videos. We'll verify that networking and SSH is up and running. And then we're going to configure the Linux operating system using command lines. We'll wrap up with some related videos and contact information. A couple links before we get started. First of all, my name is Josh. I'm a Splunk consultant. I used to work with the Splunk professional services team, and I've been on site to many customers, picking up best practices along the way. So to learn more about me and why I make these videos, click on the icon. Secondly, if you don't mind, please like this video. Unless it gets enough likes, no one will ever see them. A while back, we launched our Big Data Developer Network. Basically, it's a chat room that connects Splunk professionals from around the world. Perfect place to ask questions, get real-time help, and generally just bounce ideas off one another. If you work with Splunk at your day job, do not work in a vacuum. Click on the icon to learn more about our developer network. And lastly, I try to push out a couple of these videos every week. If you like them, that's great. Click the icon to subscribe to this channel. Alright, with that having been said, let's put 5 minutes up on the clock. Today we have Lord of the Rings guy, and he says, one does not simply configure a Linux distro. And he's absolutely right. Our goal here is not to be sysadmins. Our goal here is to set up the Linux environment just enough so we can start playing with Splunk. What we're about to do is only going to scratch the surface, but it's a good starting point. So with that having been said, let's get started. Alright, in the first video we went out to the internet and we downloaded the CentOS minimal ISO. In the second video we created a custom virtual machine using VMware, and subsequently we mounted the disk image and we installed CentOS. Now that's all well and great, but all we have is a blank Linux VM. Today we're going to configure the Linux VM using command lines. Basically we're going to set up things like networking, SSH, NTP. That way we can create a nice foundation to build Splunk on top of. Here we have the virtual machine that we created in the last video. I'm going to bring up the console window. Here it is. And you can see that all we've done is turned it on. We're going to log in using the root user, and the password is whatever we set up when we install the operating system. In my case, it's password PASSWORD. All right, now before we do anything to the box, we're gonna take a snapshot. So release the mouse, click on the snapshot icon, and we are gonna take one. Let's name this blank install. Now this gives us a safety net. No matter what we do to the virtual machine, we'll always be able to restore it to this point. Get in the habit of doing this. We're gonna be taking quite a few snapshots as these tutorials progress. So we'll click on the take button, it'll write out the disk, and so now you see we have the snapshot, blank install, and then we have where we're at right now. Perfect. Let's close this window and get started. First thing we're gonna do is configure networking. We're gonna use VI, which is a text editor, so we're gonna type in VI, and we're gonna go to etc, sysconfig, now it's network, scripts, and the interface is ifcfg -ETH0. All right, that'll bring up this screen. We're gonna press I for insert mode, and we're gonna go down to this parameter, which is called on boot. And we are simply just gonna write yes here. What we want is we want the interface ETH0, which is your networking, to turn on every time the VM starts up. So we'll hit escape, we'll press the colon key, and then we're gonna right quit with the exclamation point. Perfect, that saves the configuration file, writes it out to disk. Now, let's take a look at our networking actually. If we type in ifconfig, what do we have? You'll see that all we have now is the loopback interface, and that's default, that's always gonna be there. So let's change that. Let's type in ifconfig ETH0, and let's bring it up. That will have executed. Now if we type in ifconfig again, All right, you'll notice that in addition to the normal loopback interface, we now have ETH0. But we're not quite out of the woods yet. You'll see that it has a couple hardware addresses and things like that, but it doesn't have an IP address yet. So to do that, we're going to type in the next command, which is SSH Client. And I'm not 100% sure what this does, but I think it takes down the interface, re-enables the interface, and then does DHCP. All I know is that if I type in ifconfig now, you'll see now that ETH0 has an IP address. So what I want you to do is I want you to get out a piece of paper and pen, and I want you to write down this IP address. Not specifically this one, but whatever yours says right here. We're going to be using that in just a moment to connect to the VM using PuTTY or terminal or something like that. The reason is this VMware console is pretty bare bones. You can't copy and paste from it very easily, and it doesn't have much of a history buffer. So we're going to use the right tool for the right job. So which SSH client should you use? Well, if you're on a Mac, you already got one built in, and that's called Terminal. But I would highly recommend iTerm 2. There's lots of settings and configurations. You can split windows, tabs, all sorts of neat stuff. For my Windows brothers, well, more than likely you're going to use PuTTY. But don't stop there. I would actually download Multi-PuTTY. It gives you tabs, a connection manager, and a lot of additional features. Let's head back out to the desktop. Here we have the console window. Now all we're going to do is we're going to minimize this one. We could close it, but then that's going to suspend the virtual machine, and we don't want that to happen. So let's click minimize. Now this VM library we don't care about, so we'll just hit close. All right, now it's time to fire up an SSH client. In my case, I'm going to use iTerm 2, so I'll click on it. And here we go. Now it's time to use SSH to connect to the virtual machine. So I'm going to type in SSH. My username is root @ and it's the IP that we wrote down earlier, 172.16.127.132. We'll hit enter. Now this is the first time I've connected to it using a remote SSH. So it's gonna say, hey, here's the RSA key, and we're just gonna click yes, or we're gonna type in yes and hit enter. Perfect, now it's challenging us for password. Again, our password is PASSWORD, or whatever you set up when you set up the virtual machine. And there we go. So now it's the same thing as before. It's just now we're not in a console window. We can highlight stuff. We can copy and paste, which is really nice. We have a lot of additional features to work with. All right, the first thing we want to do is install Network Time Protocol. This is going to make sure that the virtual machine always has the correct time and date. Now, normally this isn't a big deal when you're doing development work, but you have to remember we're developing against Splunk, and Splunk is very sensitive when it comes to timestamps. So we're going to use yum to do that. We're going to type in yum install ntp, and we'll hit enter. It'll go out to the mirrors, and it says, hey, do you want to install ntp and ntp date? And that's exactly what we want. So we'll type Y for yes and hit enter. It's going out to the internet. It's actually downloading them. And yeah, we want that. And complete. So now that we have NTP and NTP date installed, we're going to type in chk check config and ntpd on. Basically, all that does is it turns on the network time protocol service in the background. So now let's actually update the virtual machine's time. We'll type in ntp date, and then we're going to go out to pool.ntp.org. And there you go. It went out to the NTP server, and it's updated our virtual machine with the correct time and date. Now, we don't want to have to do that all the time, so we're going to type in one last command, and that is service ntpd start. Boom. Now it'll always keep the system in sync with what the real time should be. So that's pretty much it for this video. What we want to do though is we do want to save all this hard work that we did. So let's take a quick snapshot. We'll go back to our virtual machine software. I'm actually going to bring up the library. I'm going to right mouse button on this guy and hit snapshots. Let's create a new snapshot and call it initial config. And what did we do? We did networking, and we did NTP. And I'm actually going to add in here. There we go. All right, we'll take that. Now, if we ever screw something up, we can always come back to exactly this state. All right, that's it for this video. I apologize, we went a little long. Make sure to check us out on social networking sites. Our name is 5min Splunk. Also, if you had trouble keeping up with all the commands we were typing in, don't sweat it. We have a full write-up on our blog at 5minsplunk.com/blog. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments and we'll get back to you. Thank you so much for watching.